I'm recording.
It looks like I can share.
Hi, Richard.
Okay, so we'll put up the text. You see my WhatsApp, but in a moment you'll see the text. Okay, everyone see the text now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do people see it? Okay, I'm just going to move it to the screen that I'm actually looking at, and we will begin.
Ah, that's tomorrow. That's a lovely
We will begin.
Last
Beautiful picture.
Oh,
Is that one of your wedding pictures?
You're seeing, wait a minute. That's not a wedding picture, but it's also not what's supposed to appear. That's my screensaver. But I just
It's
shared
lovely.
Hold on. I'm going to stop share and start it again. We'll get the correct screen. Hold on.
oh, this
She's
was
lovely. I don't mind looking at her.
Neither do I. Okay. She'd be very embarrassed if she
I suggest everybody who is not speaking mute themselves.
Yeah. I'll take care of that, Don. Okay. And now the last class for technical reasons was a little rough, but at the very end of the class, we finally got to the scheme of things for Zionism in Israel, the four traditional possibilities. And what we saw at the end of class was that you can either view the state of Israel as something this worldly, a part of natural human history, something that just happens in the world, or you can look at the state of Israel as something otherworldly, part of a plan for divine redemption, or part of a scheme by Satan to overpower the loyal Jews who are loyal to the Torah. So if Zionism in the state of Israel, if they are otherworldly, then we saw two possibilities. Something can be otherworldly and good. It can be a good dream come true. It can be a wonderful fantasy realized. And that was the view of Gush Emunim, that the state of Israel is a work of God, and it is part of God's redemption of Israel in the world. Or you can see it as a work of Satan, like Neturei Karta did. It's otherworldly and negative. It's a work of the devil. It's the Jews rebelling against God to come back to the land of Israel before God says that it's time, before God brings the Messiah. If the state of Israel is a this worldly thing, then just like any other this worldly thing, you can take it in a negative sense, or you can take it in a positive sense. Those who took it in a negative sense were Agudat Israel. The state of Israel is just part of exile. The state of exile hasn't changed. Just like Jews could be in exile in Poland or in Russia, they can be in exile in the state of Israel. Nothing monumental has happened, but something not so monumental has happened, and it isn't even that good. Okay, it's not good to have a state that calls itself Jewish, run by people who eat pork on Yom Kippur. On the other side of the spectrum, it could be this worldly, our country could be this worldly and positive, right? A traditional Jew, an observant Jew, a Jew loyal to the Torah, can see the state of Israel not as divine redemption, not as a messianic act, and yet as something which is very good, as something which provides a safe home to millions of Jews, as a place in which Jews can build their culture, as a place in which the Hebrew language can be revived. And that's the final option that you have here. The state of Israel is a this worldly structure, It's created by human beings, not by an open act of God. And it's a very positive thing and a very good thing for Jews who are loyal to the Torah. What we shall do tonight is actually hear these people talk, okay? To read them and understand them in their own words, not in this general way that I presented it much now, but in a more powerful way, when we actually hear how these people spoke about their perspectives on Zionism in the state of Israel. Besides that, tonight, we will also get our first taste of Chabad, because Chabad is not just a Messianic movement. Today, that's almost the only thing people talk about. You know, the Rebbe, they think he's the Messiah. Nobody talks about anything else, but there's so much else to talk about. For instance, the views of Chabad on Zionism in Israel. Those views, as we will see, were not simple, and they also underwent either some evolution or some change during the 20th century. And we're going to hear also about Israel and the thought of Chabad tonight. We're going to begin with the otherworldly, with the two most extreme positions, those of Neturei Karta, the anti-Israel Haredim, those who see the state of Israel as a work of Satan, and Gush Emunim, the stridently pro-Zionist religious group, which sees the state of Israel as an act by God of Messianic redemption. And then we will move to this row, where most of the focus will be on Agudat Yisrael, but we'll also mention Chovevei Tzion and Rabbi Reines. So part one is to hasten the end before its proper time. The end is the end that I talked about, I think already, the end of 2 weeks ago. Haketz hamiguleh, the revealed end. The revealed end comes when God decides. It's not my decision. It's not your decision. It's not the Jewish people's decision. It's God's decision. God decides when he wants to redeem the Jewish people. But the Jewish people can sin by trying to hasten the end, by trying to bring the end before God has decided that it's seen now in this story by the Rebbe of Munkach, of Chaim Eliezer Shapira. This letter. This is a quote from a letter. It's a story that he wrote within a letter to the zealous who fear God in the holy city. He visited Israel, or the British Mandate, in 1930, and in wake of his visit, this, what we're about to read, is what he wrote to God-fearing Jews in Jerusalem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihya b'dvaro. Okay, since you're all on mute, I didn't hear our name. Okay, the Rebbe of Munkach, he tells a story in this letter about his trip to the land of Israel. He didn't take a plane, he went on a boat. And here's what he says about his travels and who he met when he went to visit the land of Israel. Benos'ila Eretz HaKodesh, he writes, when I traveled to the Holy Land, notice what he calls it. He doesn't call it Palestina. He doesn't call it Israel. He calls it Eretz HaKodesh because that's what this land is to him. It's the Holy Land. And when I was traveling to the Holy Land, he writes, Amarti lehabaldin. I said, to my adversary, or better translated, to the adversary. And some of you who read Hebrew may already see who the adversary is. He's not talking about some, person who was his adversary. He's talking about the devil himself. I met the devil on the boat when I was traveling to the Holy Land. And I said to him, Terem nisiati Istanbul al asfina, when I was waiting in Istanbul on the boat, here's what I said to the devil, to Satan. Bilet, that's not Hebrew, it means a ticket. Shel nisiyah ole l'sacharav. He says, this ticket to the Holy Land costs a heck of a lot of money. And I don't want to pay the money and make the trip if it's not going to be worth it. And if I see you here on the boat, if I encounter Satan on the boat to the land of Israel, I see that going to the land of Israel might not be a good thing. And maybe I shouldn't spend money on a ticket. So he continues, Amarti lo, I said to the devil, I offered the devil a choice. Bichar licha echad mishne ofanim. Please decide, I said to the devil, do one or the other. O atatisa le'eretz hakodesh, vani eshaer b'chu. If you like, you stay on the boat and go to the Holy Land, and I will remain here in exile. V'yeh li tov biladecha b'chu. And it will be very good and well for me here in exile, as long as I don't have you nearby. I don't like hanging with the devil. Oh, here's the other option he gives to the devil. Tisha'er b'chul v'ani v'des ala eretz hakodesh. If you want, you stay here in Istanbul, and I'll go to the Holy Land without you, because without you, it'll be a worthwhile trip. So what do you think the devil chose? Uvachar lo lisha'er b'chul. The devil decided to wait, or to stay, in Istanbul in exile. And the Rebbe of Munkach felt himself to be blessed. Now he can continue on the boat to Eretz Yisrael, to the Holy Land, and the devil won't be with him. V'samachti b'nesiati al asfina. He said, I was overjoyed on my trip to the Holy Land because I was traveling without Satan. Uvevo'i le'eretz hakodesh. But when I arrived in the Holy Land, you know, you never really get away with anything when it comes to the devil, right? So when I arrived in the Holy Land, miyad al hanamal ri'itiv levaladin omed shama. I get to the port, and who do I see waiting for me? In the, where people greet people who get off the boat. I see the adversary. I see my friend, the devil, who I thought I had left in Istanbul. V'tza'akti mike'ev libi. And I cried out from the pain in my heart. Mata osepo. What are you doing here? Halo inachticha b'Istanbul. V'amarti shetishaer shama. Well, we discussed this. And I left you in Istanbul, and you said you'd remain there, and you wouldn't come with me to the Holy Land. V'hayiti be'einav kimita'atea. The devil heard me saying these things, and he thought me to be a fool. Vaya'an vayomar. And he answered me and said, Ata tishaleni ma e'esepo. Who the heck are you to ask me what I am doing here in the Holy Land? And he this is what the residents of Sodom said to Lot when he didn't want to release the angels for them to abuse. They said, you came to dwell amongst us, and now you set yourself up as a judge of us? This is my place, said Satan to the Rebbe of Munkach. You're visiting me in my hometown, in my home, and you're asking me what I'm doing here? Halo bechana nidar b'kviut dirati. This is my permanent residence right here in the Holy Land. Uma shedibarta im echad ketmunati b'Istanbul. And the fact that you talked to somebody who looked like me in Istanbul, zeu haya bevadai shluchi b'chul. That was probably just my shaliach, my servant, my messenger in Chutz La'aretz. You didn't talk to me. You talked to one of my henchmen. But if you're looking for me, this is my permanent residence. Satan lives in the Holy Land full time. All right. Before we go on in this letter, what the heck does this story mean? Who wants to venture an
Hi,
interpretation?
I'm Rabbi. It's Lisa. Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. So I'll just tell you
Sure
some
do.
musings. I'll tell you my musings as you began, which I said to myself, does a holy tzaddik or like, does a Rebbe have any kind of protexia to make a deal with the devil? That was my first question when they started conversation one. Because I was like, why is he so confident?
Apparently the protexia didn't work.
Right. Well, I wanted to say like his yashrut, his straightforwardness, kind of like a little bit how Yaakov was before some of the wrestling with the angel of Esav. I was like, this is unusual that he's so straight and narrow that he thinks he can have a conversation and this like koach will hold to it. So that was interesting to me. And then obviously,
I don't hear you now.
oh, sorry.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me
I
now?
do.
Okay. Anyway, that was number one, my first really eye-opening moment in the whole partnership or let's make a deal kind of thing. And and I guess the question I'm asking on it to see what people answer or what you're going to lead to is that obviously I think, because I've learned about the Moonkatcher, he's wise enough that he's ahead of the game somewhere where I don't understand, because I understood that he already understands all this. He's not that naive, number one, to know that he probably can't make a deal. And number two, whatever force that is, I understand that he knows when he arrives that, that he's still going to meet up. So I guess I don't know what he's really trying to say. That's all. So maybe, I don't know if that's anything.
All right.
That's
Thank you. Thanks for your musings. Does anybody have some kind of idea of what he is trying to say? It's actually not that hard.
I'm also completely like, what do you mean Hasatan lives in Eretz Yisrael? Like this is his merkaz. And the other thing is Hasatan, in what do we mean by that in this sense? I mean, we don't mean the Christian Satan, or is it the a counsel for the prosecution, which is what I've always understood in Judaism. We consider Hasatan like what is this entity in the story? I'm not getting any of that.
Well, just on that point, we've discussed that in the past. It's true that in the mainstream Jewish tradition, Satan doesn't appear as this individual, this being, this power who is independent. That's true. And yet there are parts of the Jewish tradition where you do have that kind of being, and they're mostly Kabbalistic. This is a Hasidic.
No, not just Kabbalistic, Avi. There's
Kabbalah.
Avi.
Yes,
there's Eov,
yes.
and definitely Eov. In Eov, we see Satan fighting, making a deal with God.
Exactly the same thing last week, Hannah.
Yeah.
Okay, exactly last week this came up with Eov. In Eov, he works for God.
Yeah.
He's the prosecutor and God is the judge.
Yeah.
Okay? And he works for God. He's not independent.
Well, it doesn't mean that here he's independent either.
one second. In Eov, it's not Satan with a capital S. It's the adversary with a lowercase a. That's the mainstream Jewish tradition. That's the Bible, like Job and a couple other places. And also in the rabbinic tradition, you don't have like Satan who is a challenge to God. You don't have that. But in the Kabbalah, you do. Okay? And in Chassidut, you could have a story of someone talking to the devil. And don't forget that there's also the matter of a sense of humor. Might not this whole story be sarcastic?
Was he possibly just
Okay, I see Jennifer's
implying
raising her hand.
that the Holy Land was filled with sinful people? A sinful environment?
Very nice. Very nice. Okay. There is an idea that the place of holiness is also the greatest danger for sin. You can see that right in the Bible, right? The place of the temple, the Holy of Holies, that's the holiest you get, but it's also the place that is most dangerous for sin, right? You go in there, if you're not ready or you're not pure, you die. If you go up on the Temple Mount and you're not pure, then it's a terrible thing. Okay, in other words, the great war between holiness and unholiness, or between purity and impurity, is right where the greatest holiness lies. That you even have in ancient sources. Okay, but it's more than that. It's also what was just said right now, that you can also see it. Okay, where do you see it? Well, think about it. He wrote this in 1930, okay? In 1930, where would you go to meet the most rebellious Jews in the world? Besides perhaps the Bund.
Israel.
Go to Israel.
Jewish Communist
Eretz
Party.
Israel. It wasn't Israel.
Exactly.
Medina Israel.
Especially,
In other words,
especially
it
the
is
way
not-
he says it. Especially the way he says it, that he met
Yeah.
him at the port. So the Chalutzim were actually,
Yeah.
the Chalutzim
Oh,
were actually
nice.
coming to the boats, and they were how do you call it? Sabidors, the ones that carry the parcels, and they go out and bring the boats and so on.
Uh-huh.
So
That's
so he
nice,
meets
Hannah.
Jews.
So you
you
uh-huh.
come and you meet Jews that are
Uh-huh.
not
The Jews,
not really practicing Judaism.
yeah.
The way he is.
Nice. Nice. The Jews that he meets in the port are Satan. These are the ultimate rebels. These are the Jews who not only eat pork on Yom Kippur, they do it in the Holy Land. They do it in the Holy of Holies. You do that in Germany, it's bad enough. But to do it in the Holy Land, there's no worse rebellion than that. You look at these people and you are looking at the work of Satan. That is who we discovered in the Holy Land. Okay, and he's telling all of this sarcastically to the strictly traditional Jews that he visited in Jerusalem in a letter to them after he already left. He said, I visited you and I see what's going on around you. You pious Jews of Jerusalem, you are like you're in the devil's house. You're surrounded by this terrible reality of rebellion against God. And so the conclusion would be that you better be really darn careful to keep away from it, to fight it, not to give it any quarter, and certainly not to be affected by it or to be understanding of it, or to cooperate with it in any way. Okay. He also quotes in that letter, from a much earlier source. And this will show us, this will be a wonderful indication that this ideology that we're looking at right now, even though it seems like a modern creation, almost all ideologies among traditional Jews have roots in the past. In other words, there's like the seeds of them centuries earlier, before anybody ever even dreamed of Zionism. And we can see this here in a 12th century remark by the Maharam of Rothenburg. The Maharam of Rothenburg was one of the great sages of the 12th century, one of the most important German rabbinic leaders. And he's responding in the 12th century to a reality where significant numbers of Jews are immigrating to the land of Israel. Okay, it's not a mass movement, but there were a good number of Jews who decided that they wanted to live in the land of Israel. And here is what he writes about them and to them. He says, if a person is going to go to the land of Israel to live, it's okay. And it can even be a great mitzvah. But take care. Uvilvad sheyehe parusham mikan vahala. As long as from this point on in his life he'll be parush, meaning he'll be an extra pious person who stays far away from mundane things. V'yizaher b'chol minei avon, and to take care to avoid all different kinds of sin. V'yikayem kol hamitzvot hanoagot ba, and he needs to take special care to keep all of the special commandments of the land of Israel, because he's not familiar with them, because in France or Germany, he didn't keep them. She'im yechetaba, for should he sin while in the land of Israel, ye'an mibachu. The punishment for sin in the land of Israel is greater than the punishment for sin outside. Why? Ki Hashem doresh ota tamid, because God is always observing the land of Israel. Ve'enei Hashem ba, his eyes are upon it. Ve'hashgachato ba tamid, and his providence is continual in the land of Israel. In the land of Israel, he is always watching every little thing you do. Ve'eno domeh hamored b'malchut b'palatin. If someone is going to rebel against the king, it's completely different where if you rebel against the king within the palace itself, lemored chutz lapalatin. You have rebels outside the palace, and that's not too good for the king. But the worst thing possible is a rebel inside the palace itself. V'hainu eretz achelet yoshveha. In the book of Numbers, the spies call the land of Israel Eretz Ochelet Yoshveha, a land that devours its inhabitants. What does that mean? According to the Maharam of Rothenburg, they didn't lie. The land of Israel is a land that devours its inhabitants. It's correct to call it that. Why? It devours its inhabitants when they sin, more so than any other land. If the inhabitants are not careful to be especially pious, the land itself destroys them, because God is always watching that land. Ve'otam shochim l'sham, and those who go there, ve'rotzim linhog kalut rosh, and want to act frivolously, uve'pachazutam lehitkotet sham, and in their lack of regard, they'll be quarrelsome there. Probably means quarrelsome against God or the Torah. Koreh ani alehem, I say about them, says the Maharami Rothenburg, I quote upon them the verse, Vatavo'u vatitameu et artzi. Jeremiah says of the Judeans You have come, of God, he says to them, you have come and you have defiled my land. Okay, it's almost better not to come at all if you're going to act in a way that will defile the land. And in Isaiah, God asks of the Israelites, these Israelites come to the temple and they're insincere and they're not righteous. And God says, who asked you to trample my courtyards? If you were pious, I would want you to come to my house, to the temple. But since you're not, it's like you're trampling my courtyards. That's what the Maharam of Rothenburg says about Jews who go to live in the land of Israel in the 12th century. And that is quoted by the Rebbe of Munkach in his letter to the Pious of Jerusalem in 1930. Any other questions? Okay. He continues in 1937 with a warning. We've seen what things have come to in these days. You remember this stuff from Shabtai Tzvi. Okay, yep. He says that in the land of Israel in our days, he says, there are the klipot, there are these shards that hide the sparks, meaning that evil is concentrated davka in the land of Israel, in the Holy Land. Asher al ken hanisyonot kashim biyoter v'sakana gdola liot sham. The most difficult trials are for those who live there, and therefore it is dangerous, meaning spiritually dangerous, to be there. Uvifrat shehaolim v'yordim sham yordei sheol tachtia. Those who go down there will go down to the deepest pits. Even here in Poland or wherever, people are already, Jews are already being confounded by wrong beliefs.
Is in Czechoslovakia.
Poland, Czechoslovakia, thank you. Okay, so Jews in Czechoslovakia have already been corrupted by wrong opinions, but all the more so in the land of Israel. When these Czech Jews arrive there, Nasim Goyim Gmurim, they become complete Gentiles, L'chalel Shabbat Kodesh, to violate the Holy Sabbath, V'la'avor al kol Torah, and to violate the entire Torah. In other words, these somewhat free-thinking Jews in Czechoslovakia, they didn't totally go off the deep end. But when they immigrate to British Palestine, that's when they become complete rebels against everything in the Torah. And he concludes, Ki agidirasham be'eretz Yisrael, dwelling there in the land of Israel, hu ka'et sakanat nefesh kemashma'o. This is absolute danger to life. It's forbidden to endanger life, therefore it's forbidden to go there. Ben kol hamiflagot hashonot, baalei hayishuv k'lomar machrivei eretz Yisrael mikdushata. He's talking about, he says, all the different parties, all the different streams, it's all awful. Ki yitztarchu yirei Hashem ba'al kol. Those who fear God will only survive as God-fearers by fighting these awful, harsh, continual wars. Otherwise, there's no way to survive there as a pious Jew.
And Munkach, was one of these one of these places that in 1939, a year after he wrote that, okay, was taken by the Germans to concentration camps. Not many came back. I personally know a couple of people from Munkach that came back from the concentration camps. They lived in London, Ontario, and most of the community was devastated.
My cousin
grew up in Rothenburg, and in 1939, she saw what was happening. And
Yes.
she joined Beitar, one of the movements, in order to get to Palestine. And she tried to convince her mother and sister to also go. And the mother said, no, this is my home, I'm not leaving. And the sister wouldn't leave. Her father had died some time before. And they ended up in Theresienstadt and then in Auschwitz. My cousin, yeah.
It's not, it's
my
it's
cousin.
fairly common.
And my cousin, Davka, she was on an illegal ship and she landed in Upleat, finally, after all kinds of problems. That's where she met her future husband. And they went to Kibbutz Dorot, which was so anti-religious that they weren't allowed to get married unless they had a child.
My gosh.
Yep.
That was from Czechoslovakia.
Wow. Wow. I think Hannah's comment about, this vehement, vicious opposition to going to Israel before the Holocaust is demonic. You're going to the land of the devil. You're going to become a rebel against everything that's holy if you go there. I think, Hannah, I think here is where it's most appropriate. It had come up earlier, almost 2 centuries ago with the Khatam Sofer, and you said something like that. I think this is the place where it's like, it's the bullseye. Okay. This is exactly it. This vehement, vicious, uncompromising opposition. If you go,
Well,
then
it's the
you're
same with the Rabbi of
rebel against
Satmar. You're
everything that's
bringing here the
holy.
Rabbi of Satmar. I can tell you personal stories from the Rabbi of
A second.
Satmar.
How do you have personal stories of the Rebbe of Satmar?
Because my father and mother and my sister and brother, my father was a shaliach. My parents were shlichim in Satmar. And my father organized a Zionist movement in Satmar. And in 1939, yeah, just in the middle of 39, the border between Satmar and it was divided. Satmar that ended up belonging to Hungary, and the border with Romania. My parents had to go back to Temesvar, to Timișoara, which was in Romania. It's in Satmar was also part of Transylvania, but it became Hungary. My father took the youth, all the youth that were there, the youth that in the youth movement, in the Barisia Habonim movement, that he was responsible for putting up in Satmar. He managed to get them all out. The day before they left, the Satmar Rebbe called my father. And this is a true story that I'm telling here for the first time in public.
Wow.
Okay? I told it to other people quietly, but this is because I cannot keep it quiet anymore. He came to my father. He did not allow his Talmidim to associate with those terrible Zionists. But he called my father. He knew what was going on. He knew. And he asked my father to take his daughter together with the Hasidim, with the Zionists, with the terrible, yeah. And my father agreed, and he took his daughter with him. Later, years later,
Wow.
this group was then put on a boat. My sister was one of the people on this boat. That was the last boat that went out of Romania to Palestine through Turkey, the day after they sailed, Romania became part of the Axis and came into the war. Okay? She arrived, and the whole boat arrived in Israel. His daughter somehow, the Hasidim, the Satmar Hasidim that were here in Israel, took her in Satmar. And that I learned years later, because it happened to be that the Chazan in London, Ontario, in the synagogue, came back from Auschwitz. And he was a Satmar Chassid at that time with a Rebbe. And he said to me, when he said he's from Satmar, I shared with him the story, and he became totally white. And he said, you know that we all thought that his daughter died because they said Shiva.
Oh.
Okay? And that was a rabbi that took all his Hasidim and sent them to Auschwitz. But he saved himself with a train, with, you know very well the story, okay? On the train.
The Kastner train.
Kastner train. So don't tell me anything about this disgusting person.
In Sigalit's class, I'm blanking out on his name. We have someone who also was ex-Satmar, and he was expressing similar sentiments.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't share with him this story because I think that he would really be very upset.
Chana, I think what you did is very important because now the story will be documented.
Thank you.
Don records the class.
Thank you very much.
Wow,
You know,
it's hard for me now to read this next paragraph.
There are absolutely terrible. I have pictures of my family in Satmar when they were there shlichim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
don't know what to do now. Can I read this Can I read this paragraph? Maybe what I'll do is I'll summarize the paragraph.
Different eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, summarize.
Say what?
Summarize.
Okay. Well, you know, after the Holocaust, the attitude of the vast majority of people was that this advice was wrong. But there were still some people after the Holocaust, the Rebbe himself, obviously, but he's not the only one, who still considered the advice to be correct. And he writes here about how you have a catastrophe of such proportions that it can't be compared to anything in thousands of years of Jewish history. Nothing like it has ever happened before. And you ask yourself, why? And if your ideology is like that of the Rebbe of Munkach, then the answer is almost self-evident. Why would God punish Jews in a way and with violence that never happened before? It would probably be in response to a sin that had never, ever occurred before. And the sin that people like this bring up is the sin, which is the title of the section, of rushing the redemption, of returning to the land of Israel before the proper time. Never before was there a mass
tell me
movement
one
of
thing.
Jews.
Tell me one thing. How come, if that's exactly so, how come that his Hasidim were killed, but the ones that came to Israel were saved?
I have.
Chana, it's not for me to give the answer. Yeah,
Avi,
go
I have
ahead,
a comment also.
Marion.
It's the only thing in our memory, in our history, that was like the Holocaust. However, I think the destruction of the temple was for the people of that time as great a catastrophe, because that was God's house. How could this happen? How could God's house be destroyed, and how could his people be? I think it was, and them being sent into exile, I think that was as great a catastrophe at that time.
I think, Marion, that the people in the Torah Karta are talking from hindsight. They look back and they say that nothing, not even the destruction of the temple, was anything like this. And I think there's not a few Jews in our time who would agree with them. There's plenty. Okay, even in the destruction of the Second Temple, to think about what happened in Europe, to say that it's entirely new and that it's uncomparable, it's not hard to say. That's the theory. I'm not gonna read this paragraph out of I guess that's the theory behind this paragraph. The theory behind the paragraph
Are
is
these
that there was
religious
never a
Jews?
rebellion against God like this before, and that's why there was never a punishment like this before. I'm sorry. Yes.
So this punishment that fell upon the religious Jews that remained and therefore went to Auschwitz or to the other camps, this is supposed to be like the sacrificial lambs that, this is the sacrifice of the Jewish people because we have all of these sinners in trying to build Israel. All of these religious observant people died as a sacrifice for that sin. What's the
You're asking.
logic?
I don't think there's anyone. I don't think there's anyone who can answer you. There's a verse, Bikdoshai Kadish. I become holy through the lives of my holy ones. There's Chazal that once the evil is released, it strikes everyone, pious and impious alike. There's the sense here is not that it's so much a sacrifice of the pious. It's more like the wrath of God cannot be contained because the sin is so horrible.
Well,
but it's hard. I have to admit that to be a lawyer for this position is impossible for me. So if I'm not doing a very good job, that's the reason. We'll read one thing here. A Satmar Chassid from after the war, okay, who talks about the compromisers, about the pious Jews who do accept the basic legitimacy of the state of Israel. He says, Oy lo tabusha, woe to the embarrassment, to the shame. Asher anashim shod b'chol yom tefillin. Men who make tefillin every single day. Yoshvim be'ota knesset kinus t'risha'im. They sit in that Knesset, which is a gathering of evildoers. Asherim chotmim al sheker. They therefore give a stamp of legitimacy to the lie. אשר רוצה לזייף חותמו של הקדוש ברוך הוא רחמנא ליצלן. These people are trying to falsify, to forge the chotam, the seal of the Holy One, blessed be He, God forbid. What he means there is that they're using the name Israel for something which is unholy. These people in the Knesset, they want to decide things through a vote, through a majority vote, but they're deciding God's word through a majority vote. That's what they vote on. They vote on how much will we trample God's Torah underneath. And how much will we allow the Torah to be observed amongst us? Kabel pras. And then these supposedly pious Jews who sit in the Knesset, then they receive a prize. They get rewarded. They get a salary and they get funds. Miyad oivei Hashem, from the enemies of God. Hamechabkim et hasheker b'chol kocham, who hug falsehood with all of their might. So sometime when you get mad at the representatives of the Haredim in the Knesset, remember that you're not the only one mad at them. There's also people on the Haredi side who are mad at them for the chutzpah and the falsity of sitting in the Knesset in the first place. Okay? These groups, to the best of my understanding, Neturei Karta refused to accept state funding since the establishment of the state.
At least they're not hypocritical about it.
Well, Chana is suggesting that might not be the case, meaning that the actions of the Satmar Rebbe in the Holocaust may have been highly hypocritical.
No, but
Okay.
you say they don't take money from the government. That's at least a step in the right
that's
direction.
debatable. That's debatable. What do you mean taking money from the government? Okay, they live.
Avi said it, not
They
me.
don't. Yeah, I understand, but they don't pay taxes. Yet they want the benefits.
Yeah,
They
that's
go to the
equivalent to
hospitals.
taking money.
Yeah.
They go to the hospitals. They go and they have all kinds of other things, right?
Yeah,
They
you're
buy
absolutely
products.
right.
There's a whole group in Jerusalem, I know, and there may have been a few in Spot that wouldn't even take immunizations from the Tipat Chalav when I worked for the Tipat.
Well, that's a different story. They
They
wouldn't
had
take immunizations
diphtheria in
anyways.
their neighborhoods every year. At least 5 cases of diphtheria.
But they wouldn't take immunizations anyways because they don't believe in it. But that's a different story.
Take them in the
Avi,
States
I'm
if they
sorry,
buy it from a private doctor, but they won't take it from the Israeli government.
Well, but who is a private doctor if not an Israeli? Anyways, you know, it's hypocrisy from beginning to end. However, I'm sorry, I have to leave you guys. So you're not going to.
Thank you.
Chana, thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for the stories that you
And
told.
have a wonderful end of this discussion. I will listen to it tomorrow on the thing.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll meet you all in the new semester. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Chana.
Thank you, Hannah.
Bye.
Good trip.
Avi, you mentioned Neturei Karta. I know Neturei Karta came out of Satmar, but my understanding was they were too not so even for Satmar, and Satmar basically put them in Hakerem. Is that not the case?
I don't know the whole story. I do know that Neturei Karta and Satmar are not the same group, although there's a good amount of overlap between them. But I'm really not, I'm not knowledgeable about the details. The only thing I spend time reading about is the ideologies.
Well,
Okay. What? I missed that. Okay. Here's also the last quote is nasty remarks about the Agudat Israel party for sitting in the Knesset. These are the people that are known today as Degel HaTorah and Yadut HaTorah and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, he says that they're sinning because they give legitimacy to those who violate the Torah or who feel that the Torah can be voted about. Okay, we'll finish with that and we'll go on to the next section. The next section is the exact opposite. Okay, it's not that you're hastening the end before its time. It's rather that the end is hastening. God is knocking on the door. God wants to bring the redemption. All you have to do is open the door and welcome the redemption in. Okay? We're going to begin with Rav Kook, with a very, very famous passage by Rav Kook, where Rav Kook is contemplating the same thing that the Rebbe of Munkach contemplated. He's looking at the exact same people. He's looking at these Zionists who rebel against tradition, and at the same time, they're totally devoted to building a country for their people. So he writes, Dorenu Hudor Nifla. Our generation is an astounding generation. Okay? Doesn't mean wonderful generation. It means astounding. It means you look at these young people, at these young Zionists, and it blows your mind. To watch them, to see them, to understand them, it blows your mind. Why? Says Rav Kook. Dor shekulo timhon. This is a generation which is an impossible mystery. Kashe me'od limsolo dugma b'chol divrei yamenu. Before we were talking about whether there was ever such a catastrophe. Here he's asking whether there was ever such a generation. Was there ever a generation in the history of the Jewish people that could compare to the generation of the young Zionists in, say, the 1930s? Humurkav mehafachim shonim. This generation is, how do you say it when you take part of one tree and you put it on the other tree? What's the word for that in English?
Grafted.
Thank you. This generation is grafted from opposites. Two opposites have been grafted together in this generation. And he quotes a famous phrase, Choshech ve'or meshameshim bo bi'erbuvia. In this generation, darkness and light are mixed up and blended together within it. Hushafal v'arud. This generation is lowly and fallen. Gam ram v'nisa. And at the very same time, it is uplifted and glorious. Hu kulo chayav, gam kulo zakai. This generation is entirely guilty and also entirely innocent. Just think about for a moment the Rebbe of Munkach. The Rebbe of Munkach sees these people as entirely guilty. So does Rav Kook. He sees exactly what the Rebbe of Munkach says. This is a guilty generation, an entirely guilty generation. And yet at the very same time, he blinks and looks at them again and says at the very same time, they are entirely innocent. It's a paradox for Rav Kook, not a guilty verdict. Me'ever mizeh, Beyond that, and now he's going to quote some sources. He quotes from a Mishnah which says that at a certain time, chutzpah yisgeh, that chutzpah, I don't have to say it in English, I guess. Chutzpah will be enormous, will be widespread. Ein haben mitbayesh me'aviv, a son has no shame from his father. Ne'arim penei zkenim yalbinu, and young people will embarrass and make their elders and make their elders' faces turn white. That's what the Mishnah says about a certain generation. Ulumadze, and opposite this, rikshe hachesed, the kindness or grace, yosher, the uprightness of this generation, hamishpat, justice, the hachemla and mercy, olimu mitbagrim, in this generation, they rise and they are becoming stronger and more powerful in this generation. Hakoach hamadai v'haideali poretz v'oleh, and both scientific forces and idealism are growing and becoming ever stronger in this generation. Okay. To better understand this passage, before we go on, I'll show you the two sources that he used. The first source he used is when he said that the generation is kulo chayav, gam kulo zakai. The generation is entirely guilty and entirely innocent. That comes from a passage in the Talmud. The Talmud says, get a wind of this, Ein ben David ba, ella bedor shekulo zakai v'chulo, o is supposed to be o kulo, that's a misquote. O kulo chayav. The son of David, meaning the Messiah, will only come in a generation that is entirely guilty or in a generation that is entirely innocent. So what does that mean? The idea is that the Messiah only comes at a time of extremity. If the Jewish people have fallen to the lowest levels, then God needs to send the Messiah to redeem them and to save them from their folly. If the Jewish people has risen to the highest levels, then God sends the Messiah to reward them. Then they deserve the Messiah. And this Talmudic passage is saying that the Messiah is not going to come until one of those two things happens. Either Jews are the worst of the worst, or Jews are the best of the best. Wait for one or the other, and then the Messiah will come. And Rav Kook, it's brilliant when you think about it. What does Rav Kook do with that Talmudic passage? He says the Talmudic passage has been realized in full in our generation in a completely unexpected way. We thought the Messiah would come when the Jews were the worst of the worst, or when the Jews are the best of the best. Instead, what's happening, says Rav Kook, we have a generation which at once is the worst of the worst and the best of the best. It's a single generation. The Zionist pioneers who are at once the worst of the worst and the best of the best. Okay, and finally, I'll reveal to you, when did the Mishnah say? When did the Mishnah say that there would be a lot of chutzpah and sons will not feel shame before their fathers? The Mishnah said that would happen at a time that it calls bi'ikvot mishicha, in the footsteps of the Messiah. In the traditional sources, you have this dichotomy between the footsteps of the Messiah versus the Messianic age. The footsteps of the Messiah are what will precede the Messianic age. The Messianic age itself will be perfect, but the footsteps that precede it will be a time of tribulation, a time of some terrible things. And what Rav Kook does with that, if you look, is he quotes the Mishnah without those two words. He says, look at this generation. This generation is indeed a generation of chutzpah. It takes a lot of chutzpah, right, to eat pig on Yom Kippur, okay, when your parents were traditional Jews. This is a very chutzpahdik generation, says Rav Kook. And yet it is not the generation of Ikvot Mishicha, of the footsteps of the Messiah. It is the generation of the Messiah. The process and the redemption are coming at once. And it's a process that has to complete itself. Okay. Any comments on Rav Kook? Okay. If not, then
Well,
we
I-
will look at his yes.
A lot of food for thought.
A lot of food for thought. There's something interesting about this the passage. I'll go back to the passages. The passage begins Doreinu, our generation, and this essay by Rav Kook is the most famous essay that is studied in religious Zionist schools, and there's been commentaries written on it. It's Rav Kook's most famous passage, more than anything else. It's called Ma'amar Hador in Hebrew, the essay about the generation. And there's a lot of discussion over the past couple decades in religious Zionism about whether Rav Kook's essay about our generation, meaning his generation, still applies to our generation today. Okay? Because you're talking about a generation that was extraordinarily idealistic, that made people who made enormous changes in their lives, who came from traditional homes and became rebels against tradition, who left Europe and went to the land of Israel, right? Who devoted their lives to building the land of Israel for their people, who taught themselves to speak Hebrew, right? Which wasn't fully a living language. And the question is, I think, a legitimate question. Mm-hmm. Can you say that about the generation of young people today? Okay? The idealism and the sacrifice and the drastic changes. So educators who use this essay in their education, there's an endless amount of discussion about how to teach this essay in a generation which seems so different than the generation that Rav Kook was talking about. But where, on the other hand, some people respond, maybe there are similarities between the generations. Meaning, you still have people who, say, in the army, right? They risk their lives to defend their people, and you have a lot of idealism remaining in religious Zionism. And it's a major discussion.
I think that if you're
If
going
there's
to
no
have
further
a
comments, we'll go now
generation,
to Rav Kook's son. Oh, go ahead.
if you're going to have a generation that's going to build something new and meet extreme challenges, then you have to have a generation that's willing to think outside of the box and break with traditions. If you're always going to do the same thing, you achieve nothing new. So you can't possibly have the building of something that's contained entirely within a traditional framework. You don't have the energy and the supply to do anything but what you normally do every day if you're stuck in the traditional framework. So there was be no way to rebuild an Eretz Israel.
What you're doing is you're supplying a rationale to what Rav Kook said.
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, I think he has a
Okay.
recognition
I like the
of that.
rationale, and I think that in Rav Kook's writings, you find this idea, the idea that you're describing, that the redemption needs to come from those who rebel, because those who don't rebel don't have the spiritual power to make it happen.
What Jennifer said reminds me of, I've often thought, and this is nothing to do with Zionism, Schindler's List. I mean, Oskar Schindler was a shit. He was a cheat. He was on every level. He was a, and I've sometimes thought that that's what allowed him to do what he did, because he had a basis of morality despite all the bad things he did, but he was prepared to not follow the rules. And the fact that he was this, all those bad things allowed him to do the good things in a very ironic way. And what Jennifer said really reminded me of that.
Caroline, don't forget that the sparks are hidden within these dark shards.
And
you're
yes,
being Kabbalistic.
Oh, stop it. I refuse to accept that.
Okay, it does fit. Okay. All right. Let's see something from Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who, this is Rav Kook's son, who became the ideologue for Gush Emunim later on. He asks, איך לא יצאה תנועת הגאולה המעשית בימינו, הכוללת יישוב וכיבוש הארץ ויציאה מהגלות וחיסולה, מהחוגים הדתיים? He asked the obvious question, how is it possible that the movement for redemption, to settle the land of Israel and conquer it, and to leave the exile and gather the exiles, how did this movement not come from the religious Jews? Why? איך קרה שהיו קולות דתיים שאפילו הסתייגו מן הציונות ותנועת הגאולה? How is it that there were religious voices who even opposed Zionism, religious voices who opposed the movement for redemption? Aren't religious Jews supposed to want redemption? So why should they have been the voices who opposed redemption? The reason is, he says, these religious Jews who accused the Zionists of hastening the redemption before its time, they didn't realize that it is not us, people of flesh and blood, who are hastening the redemption. Ela balabayit Adon Shalom. It is the master of the house, the master of the world, who hadochek otanu. He is pushing us. It's not the Zionists who are pushing redemption before its time. It's God who is pushing the Zionists. It is not the voice of flesh and blood. It is not flesh and blood, but rather the voice of the living God, which cast down the wall that had separated us from our land. Bikor olanu alei. It was a voice from heaven saying, alei, arise, make aliyah, come to the land of Israel. This was the call of God, not the call of secular Zionists. So both the religious ones were wrong and the secular ones were wrong. The religious ones thought that the seculars were rebelling against God by bringing redemption before its time. The secular Zionists thought that they were doing flesh and blood actions, human actions, and they didn't realize that they were actually that they were actually realizing the will of God. What do you say about that, ladies and gentlemen? If there's
It's
nothing
a
to
more
say.
sensible kind of view for our modern people to take.
Yeah, I like it, but in
What makes it
view of what I
sensible?
said about my cousin's kibbutz, it's kind of
Mhm.
paradoxical.
Wow. It's very paradoxical. What makes it paradoxical?
In that, according to Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, they were motivated by God to build the land, and yet they negate entirely all the teachings of God.
No, they were pushed
They
by
are
God
unwitting
to build the
servants
land,
of
but they
God.
didn't know that they were pushed by God. God has his hand, and then the people have what they believe are their own works. And it's part of the whole plan that God has for this happening in this interpretation. So you don't have to necessarily see yourself as the instrument of God, but this rabbi recognizes that you're the instrument of God.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's not as
All right.
paradoxical as it sounds.
It's not paradoxical. There's a traditional idea long before Zionism that that people are parts of God's plan. Okay, and they may not even realize it. They may not even know it. A famous expression of it. It's a little bit off track, but I think it's a good illustration. A famous expression of it is the commentary of Nachmanides, the Ramban, on the story of the selling of Joseph. If you remember that God tells Joseph to go find his brothers, check up on them, to see how they're doing as they graze the flocks. So he says, go find them. The flocks are grazing in Dotan. So Joseph goes to Dotan and he doesn't find his brothers. And he wanders around in a field and he can't find his brothers.
That's
And
not
then he
exactly, that's not
encounters
exactly
a man.
true. What he said was he went looking for him, and he met a man. He met a man along the way, and he asked, "Where are they?" And he said, "In Dotan." He directed him to Dotan.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Shechem. It was Shechem. I'm sorry, Shechem. He looks for them in Shechem. Thank you. And he doesn't find them in Shechem. And the man sees him wandering in the field, and he says, "Mativakesh, what are you looking for?" And he says these poignant words, "Et achai ani mivakesh." I am seeking my brothers. Right? It's a double meaning. I'm not just looking for where they are. I'm also seeking people who will treat me as their brother, which doesn't happen initially. And eventually, he finds them in Dotan. So the rabbis, the Midrash says that who was this man? It was the angel Gabriel. God sent an angel to make sure that Joseph found his brothers. And then come the more rational commentators and say, Angel Gabriel, who knocked you on the head? There's no angel Gabriel here. There's just some guy walking around in a field. That's what Ibn Ezra says. And then the Ramban says, you're both right. It was just some guy walking around in a field. But that guy was the messenger of God, because God needed Joseph to find his brothers. If he had not found his brothers, we wouldn't be sitting here together on Zoom having this class. Because if Joseph hadn't found his brothers, he wouldn't have been sold into slavery. He wouldn't have wound up in Egypt being the vice pharaoh. He wouldn't have saved that region of the world from famine. the children of Israel would have died. It was all part of God's plan that this man be in the field to guide Joseph to his brothers. So it's an ancient idea. It's not a new idea that people can be the messengers of God, the servants of God, unwittingly. They don't realize it.
Well, there's another story as well.
Right, from what, yeah.
There's another story as well, the story of Pharaoh himself.
Okay.
God was just played around with him, and the text says it hardened his heart. Okay, but I mean, Pharaoh always had the free will to decide, but he made decisions, and God pushed him in a certain direction. All right. So in a sense, the Zionism as a movement, okay, either you listen to it or you don't listen to it. Some people listen to sorry, I'm saying that some people listen to the.
We're silent for a few moments.
Oh, some people listen to the voice, to the calling, and some people don't. Some people act on it, and some people don't. But the calling is there.
Okay. The Pharaoh example, it can be read in more than one way, but it's certainly a nice example, and I think it's paradoxical in one obvious way, which is these people who are atheists and are such rebels against tradition that they're the ones who are the agents of God. But there's also a bit more to it than that, okay? And there's been a lot of criticism of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. First of all, on a political level, right? He's the ideological leader of Gush Emunim. Gush Emunim is a movement that was involved in a lot of political controversy, had its supporters, had its detractors, and for a very long time, for so many years after the Yom Kippur War, it was either you loved it or you hated it. There wasn't much middle ground regarding Gush Emunim. One of the criticisms of it, one of the criticisms of those who opposed it or found it disturbing, to say the least, is that it makes secular Zionism into the servant of something that it doesn't believe in. Okay, if you get my gist, okay, you can take this in a way where you have secular Zionists draining the swamps, building the kibbutzim, fighting off the marauders, setting up the IDF, fighting the wars, and doing all of that so that who will eventually enjoy the rewards, enjoy the fruits of those actions? Who will it be? The followers of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. Okay? In other words, the message of Gush Emunim, in a certain way, was that everything you did, it wasn't for the reasons that you thought. It's for what we represent. Not only was it for what we represent, but we represented better than you. Okay? You were once the pioneers, and now we are the pioneers. You were once the fighters, and now we are the fighters. And if you want to make it a little even more disturbingly, you were once the Zionists, and now we are Zionists. Okay? It takes everything that this that secular Zionism fought for and strived for, and makes it into the humble servant of something that secular Zionism not only may not see as so great, but also may see as utterly insane. okay? Because what you have here is, you have here a description of God pushing the Zionist movement. If this is an act of God, then it cannot fail. If it's an act of God, it is indestructible. And if people who believe that it's an act of God, in this sense, take power, then they won't govern the state of Israel as a rational country. Okay, this was the criticism of what Rav Tzvi Yehuda represented. I didn't quote it here on this page, but there's a famous speech by Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. Maybe a few of you are familiar with it. I imagine that many of you are not. That shortly before the 6-Day War, he stood in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav, the central yeshiva that his father built, and he spoke to his students, and he said, and he cried. He cried and he said that people are satisfied with what they have. We set up the state of Israel. We built a country. We brought in millions of immigrants. We're happy with this. We're satisfied with this. We rejoice in this. We thank God for this. And it is enough for us. And he literally broke down crying. And he said, it's not enough for me. In 1967, before the 6-Day War. He said, it's not enough for me. Where is our Jerusalem? Where is our Hebron? Where is our Samaria? Okay, and then when the 6-Day War happens and the state of Israel took all of these places, the heartland of the ancient Judea, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook was seen by his followers as almost a prophet. Okay, because he said these things right on the eve of the 6-Day War, when everyone was depressed and nobody thought that Israel would win the next war, and he predicted, and he yearned at least for all of these things, which did become part of the Zionist enterprise. So that is a bit regarding Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. One of the more well-known students of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who to this very day still writes, and he's been quite influential, and there's a lot of people who follow him to this day. In recent years, the things that he's written have sometimes seemed rather strange, and I know at least one person who thinks that he might be senile. He might have been brilliant before and less so now. But my experience is that at least in the stuff that he wrote decades ago, and perhaps less recently, he was absolutely brilliant, whether you agree with him or not. And I'm going to give you one example of Rav Shlomo Aviner. Shlomo Aviner, by the way, is an immigrant. He wasn't born here. He's an immigrant from France. He says, "V'im yochash lecha adam." He says, if someone whispers to you in your ear, "Lo ra'iti et HaMashiach la'achrona, lo b'stot HaGolan, v'lo b'merchavei Sinai." He's already talking after the 6-Day War. And he says, if someone tells you, I've been around, I've traveled from the Sinai Desert to the Golan Heights, I've seen all. I've seen the vast expanse of the state of Israel following the 6-Day War. I've seen it, but I have not seen the Messiah. No Messiah here. So Rav Aviner says about this person, Adam Yashar V'chenhu. This is an upright, sincere person. This person tells it like it is. I've seen the whole country from north to south. never met the Messiah. He's being honest. Shalma shelo ra'a omer lo ra'iti. An honest person who hasn't seen something says, I haven't seen it. Honest man. Aval im yitzad shal nosaf le'emor. But if this same person takes yet another step, and he says, Mikevan shelo ra'iti, vadai eno benimtza. If he says, since I haven't seen the Messiah, since I haven't met the Messiah, must not be here, tehafech amirato lemasat shavu madochim. Then that which he has said becomes something utterly reprehensible, worthless. Ve'af ata emor though, and then you should tell him, and you should say to him, Ulai enecha ro'eh, aval acherim ro'im. Maybe you travel from the Golan to the Sinai and you don't see the Messiah, but there are others who do see them, who do see him. Excuse me. What he means here is that there are others who see the hand of God in Israeli history. Anu kovim et havadaiyut hamuchletet. Look at that phrase in Hebrew. We establish, we, by we he means Gush Emunim. We establish havadaiyut hamuchletet, the absolute certainty shel hofa'at geulatenu achshav, the absolute certainty of the appearance of our redemption right now. Kol hatzarot ha'ikuvim v'asibuchim, all of the troubles and the things that cause it to stop a little bit, and all of the complications. She'avarnu v'anu ovrim, that we've gone through all kinds of complications, and we're still going through complications. Hem rigiim, they are momentary. Ve'en b'chocham leha'iv al ha'malach ha'klali v'ha'adir hazeh. They have not the power to overshadow this general and great process. Okay? The redemption is brought by God. God brings it as a process. The process may have its ups and downs while it's still going on. It still has to kind of, work itself out, but the direction is clear, and none of these things can stop it. HaMashiach hazeh, this Messiah, shekocho tamun mimei kedem b'michmanei hahistoria umitgaleh achshav b'foal. Okay, the Messiah is something which it was planted, it was waiting in history for the time to come out, and now is the time when it comes out and is actually active. It's like kind of like a computer program. The program can be sitting on your computer, and then you activate it, you run it. Okay, so the Messiah has been sitting there on the hard drive, and now is the time when God has decided to run the program. Once the program's begun, well, it takes a little bit of time to upload or download or whatever. But once you press start, nothing can stop it. And that's a bit from Rav Shlomo Aviner, reflecting the thought of his teacher, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. So the texts we've seen now are the opposite side. We saw those who think that the state of Israel or modern Zionism, the state of Israel is demonic. Now we've seen those for whom the modern state of Israel, the Zionist movement, is Messianic. Okay, both of them see superior forces forces from heaven or maybe from hell running the process, but and they don't see it as a part of a natural, normal human history. Now, in the time we have remaining, we will meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe in a quote that I think will probably surprise most of you. We're going to see now the ideology that says that the state of Israel is this worldly, and it's not the greatest thing. It's not absolute evil, okay? But it's certainly not what we would have hoped for. It's certainly not the greatest thing to have happened. Better things could have happened instead of the state of Israel. And yet, now that it's here, we need to deal with the reality that we live in. So here's Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneersohn, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, talking about Zionism, talking about Israel. I think most of you who are listening probably remember the Lubavitcher Rebbe and his Hasidim as people who were and still are very supportive of Israel. Is there anyone who disagrees with that? Okay. I didn't think there would be. But even though that's the case, even though we have strong support of Israel from Chabad, both during the Rebbe's lifetime and afterwards, it does not mean that that was ideological support in the sense that we've seen it so far. The Rebbe didn't see the state of Israel as demonic. The Rebbe also didn't see the state of Israel as something messianic. He saw the state of Israel as something quite else, which comes out very clearly in his words. He says, I don't know if he actually said this in 1982, but the book that contains it was published in 1982. Maybe he said it in the 70s. Hatkufa ba anu nimtsaim ata. The period, the historical period that we find ourselves in, Eina atchalta de gula, is not the beginning of the redemption. And you're going to love the next part of the sentence. Va'aliyatam shel Yehudim rabim le'eretz hakodesh eina kibbutz galuyot. The aliyah of so many Jews to the Holy Land is not the ingathering of the exiles. Isn't that weird? What does he mean by that? What could he mean by that? Someone's speaking, but I can't hear.
Snoring.
Okay. Oh, that was Richard. Okay. If you have something to say, you can unmute yourself. All right. He says that the immigration of so many Jews to the Holy Land is not the ingathering of the exiles. What in the world does that mean? The exiles are being ingathered. What apparently he means is that there is no fulfillment of prophecy here. Okay? The prophets, they prophesy many things, the ingathering of exiles, the coming of the Messiah. He's saying that the state of Israel fulfills none of these prophecies. What he's really doing is going back to the point that we began with at the very, very beginning. The state of Israel is something that Jews over the ages could never have imagined. Jews knew exile and they knew what to expect for redemption, but they could never have imagined a situation that's, partially fulfills the promises of the prophets and partially realizes the ideals of redemption. They could have never come up with that. They could have never imagined that. So the way that the Lubavitcher Rebbe solved the problem is to say, No. A partial redemption is not redemption. A partial redemption is not the beginning of redemption. Jews moving to the land of Israel is not the ingathering of the exiles that was promised by God through his prophets. Ella, so what is it then? Efsharut shel hatzalat Yudim Rabim b'zman hagalut. What is the state of Israel? It is a beloved possibility to save the lives of many Jews during the time of exile. It's a practical way to help Jews while we are still in exile. V'hagiula shel sheker. And now he gets more negative. He says, the false redemption eina notenet legeula ha'amitit lehitgalot. The state of Israel may play a good role in that it provides a safe haven for Jews and saves their lives, but it also provides a negative role or plays a negative role. Why? Because this false redemption, when people see the state of Israel as redemption, then they're seeing a false redemption. It does not allow the real redemption to come. If Jews are satisfied with the state of Israel and see it as the redemption, then we won't get to the full redemption. Because those who think that they have already been redeemed, אינם עושים את הפעולות הרוחניות הדרושות לשם היציאה מן הגלות וגילוי הגאולה האמיתית. They will not do the proper spiritual actions that are needed in order to leave exile and make the true redemption appear. Jews need to strive for redemption, and they need to act towards redemption. If they think redemption is already here, they will not do those things. ובמילא גורמים הם להארכת הגלות. Yes?
I just had another completely bizarre connection hearing you say that. It was reminding me of, and it was probably a specific stream of communists, I couldn't tell you, the worse the better. If things are too good, then people the proletariat aren't going to rise up and have the true revolution. The Havdil, I mean, you know.
No, you're absolutely right.
Okay. Excuse me for getting political, but one thought that I've often had over the past 25 years is that attempts to improve the chief rabbinate are counterproductive. Sometimes they even succeed in making the rabbinate a little bit better and helping it serve the public a little better. But I've had the thought that that's counterproductive, because if that happens, then it will take longer for the rabbinate to fall. So I hope that doesn't make me into an insane extremist.
I don't think you'll have to push back from.
Yeah. Okay. ובמילא גורמים הם להארכת הגלות, גלות היחיד וגלות individual and public exile, communal exile are lengthened because people are fooled into thinking that they've already been redeemed. Galut Klal Yisrael, Galut Hashchina. The exile of Israel and the exile of the divine presence. All of them have been lengthened because Jews think that they've already been redeemed. Notzeret hata'ut hachi mavhila. The greatest possible error is כשישנם יהודים המוכנים להחליף, רחמנא ליצלן, את הגאולה האמיתית והשלמה. Jews who are willing to exchange the true and full redemption במעמד ובמצב בו אנו נמצאים עכשיו, for the status and the state that we find ourselves in right now. And then he plays a very cute play on words. Jews who do this, he says, they are exchanging geula for gola. The difference between the two words, Geula, redemption, and Gola, exile, is just one little letter Aleph. If you have the Aleph, you have Geula. And if you don't have the Aleph, you have Gola. And Jews, because the two words are so similar, it's easy to confuse them. And that is exactly what Jews are doing. They're confusing Gola, exile, with Geula, true redemption. That is the Rebbe.
But that's not terribly different from the Haredi view that of the spiritual dimension of Israel is lacking. In other words, Israel as a state, as a physical manifestation, is not the Geula. On the other hand, he's saying that okay, keep going. Maybe you'll get there. in a sense, he's saying, yeah, all right, okay, so keep going and see what happens. Something like that.
I don't think he's saying keep going exactly. He's saying keep going in with the this worldly things. If you can save Jewish lives and protect Jews, do it. Great. But don't keep on calling it redemption. It is not redemption. It is, to use the title of this section, it is Israel's exile in the Holy Land.
Right.
We are still in exile, even if we have Israel. In other words, the ideology of the Lubavitch, yeah, go ahead.
The state is a means and not an end. In other words.
Right. Right.
The end is something else.
In other words, yeah. Yes. And then also, in other words, the ideology of the Lubavitcher Rebbe was basically the same as the ideology of Agudat Israel, of the Haredim who sat in the Knesset. Chabad was never a member of Agudat Israel for both historical reasons and maybe ideological reasons, also maybe personal reasons, strange Hasidim. But despite that, the Rebbe always urged his Hasidim to vote for Agudat Israel. Not openly, by the way. He never said vote for this party. What he would say is you should always vote for the party that is closest to the Torah. Okay, and in general, Chabad in Israel has generally supported Agudat Israel and Yadut HaTorah, its offshoot. And that political support is reflected in the ideology because the ideologies are pretty much the same. Okay, the Belzer Rebbe. Now we're going to see something a little more negative, but still in principle, it's the same ideology. Oh, what did I do? I'm sorry. To the heretics and the angerers of God who want to uproot our holy Torah. Teeth, in the words of the Haggadah, and tell him. In other words, the evil son in the Haggadah are the secular Zionists. Simchatchem, how do you talk to a secular Zionist? Look, this is great. What you say to a secular Zionist is that your joy is my mourning and my pain. What you have built and rejoicing on Yom HaAtzmaut, this is what hurts me because you've built a secular state. Now that's what you say to a chutzpahdik secular Zionist. But what do you say to a more amiable secular Zionist? Achlat mimim shebenehem, to the more amiable ones. Chova alenu l'saper lahem. We need to tell them He's not talking about the Tam and the Haggadah to tell the Exodus. What you need to tell the Tam among the secular Zionists is about Galut Medinat Yisrael Be'eretz Yisrael. It's a great phrase. The exile of the state of Israel in the land of Israel. The Jewish state in the land of Israel is exile. That's what you tell the more amenable secular Zionist. Galut zo hi min hakasha shebagaluyot. This is one of the most difficult of exiles. V'yisoda be'ota hachraza shel oto machriz she'achriz al hakamat hamedina. And its foundation is in the announcement of the independence of the state of Israel, which was made by the founder who announced the creation of the state of Israel. He means Ben Gurion, okay? Ben Gurion was the founder of the most difficult of all exiles. Okay, he's using Ben Gurion as an example because Ben Gurion is a secularist and an atheist and a socialist. Okay, and so what Ben Gurion set up, this state, that calls itself Jewish but rebels against the Torah, you may rejoice in it, but in my heart it causes pain. Thus says the Belzer Rebbe. Okay, a little bit more. In 1945, right after the Holocaust, a leader of Agudat Yisrael, Moshe Blau, wrote the following. He says that in the land of Israel, there are 3 exiles. That you're also going to love this. Think about who holds power in Mandate Palestine in 1945. Look at this. I'm gonna bold this. Galut Edom, Galut Yishmael, v'gam Galut HaYahadut HaChovshit. Anyone know what that means? Usually Galut is called by the governing power. If you live in France in the Middle Ages, then it's Galut Tzarfat. If you live in Spain, then it's Galut Sfarad. Here he's talking about Galut Edom, Galut Yishmael, and Galut HaYahadut HaChovshit.
Galut Yishmael would be the Muslim state.
The Arabs, okay? In other words, there's lots of Arabs in Mandate Palestine. They're the majority of the population, and they hold a great deal of power. Who else is powerful in Mandate Palestine?
The British, my dear.
The British. Where does he say the British?
I'm guessing
That's
Edom.
Galut Edom.
I'm not quite sure why. That was my guess.
Edom. That was your guess. Maybe you remember it from Chanukah, okay, about the Edomi in the last stanza, right? Edom is Rome and then Christendom. Christendom controls Palestine. In other words, the British mandate is Galut Edom. So you have Galut Edom, traditionally had Galut Edom, Galut Yishmael, Jews under Christendom or Jews under Muslim rule. So he says, look, here in Mandate Palestine, we have both Christian rule and the Muslims have a lot of power. And guess who else has a lot of power in this exile? Gam Galut HaYahadut HaChovshit. Also, the exile of the Jewish freethinkers. They also hold a lot of power in this place. And we, the pious Jews, are subjugated to all 3 of them. Ve'ulai ole Eretz Yisrael alchu b'galut zo ha'achrona. Maybe for this reason, the land of Israel is an even worse exile. Shel kol panim enena b'tzura kazo b'shum eretz michutz l'Eretz Yisrael. In no other place are the Jews subjugated to 3 different powers, one of whom is a secular Jewish power. Hayadut Haredit be'eretz Israel, nirdefet al tzavara. Right? Pious Jews in the land of Israel are pursued by their necks, meaning they're trying to get caught and killed. Tigrat yada chovshim gavra aleh, and the hand of the free thinkers is powerful. And now that we've lost the healthy Judaism or the healthy Jews of Europe, the pious Jews of Europe, we've now lost them. And now we are helpless to those who are pursuing us in Israel.
Does this unit think of modern Orthodox in the same way that it thinks of so-called secular or reform or so-called conservative Jews? Or is the only?
I don't think so. I don't think so. He's writing this in 1945. This may come as a surprise to some of you, but the word Haredi in 1945, in fact, probably up until around the 60s or something, was simply a word for Jews who kept the mitzvot. Right? What you would call modern Orthodox Jews will be called in the Israeli newspapers Haredi. Okay, he may think that, some Jews who keep the commandments are, they're kind of soft. They're, they compromise here and there. Those might not be his favorites, but he really is seeing a reality where traditional Jews or observant Jews are weak within the state of Israel. And that really is the case until probably until 1977. All right, Rabbi Abraham Weinfeld. We'll finish with this. אנו עומדים לפני המציאות שהקימו מדינה על חלק מארצנו הקדושה. We are living within a reality where a Jewish state has been established on part of the land of Israel. ואם כן, אין לפנינו שאלה של הלכה אם מותר או אסור. There's no question here of halacha. Is it permissible to set up a Jewish state? Is it forbidden to create a Jewish state? Those were theoretical questions before the state of Israel arose. Ki sheila zo, it should be, sheila zo, kvar pitruha ela sheinam shoalim sheilot. Why is this question no longer relevant? Because this question has already been answered by those who do not ask halachic questions. They set up a Jewish state, whether it was permissible or not.
When was this written?
V'lo nishar lanu. This, I think, I don't remember. I guess maybe the 1970s, 80s. Okay? ולא נשאר לנו אלא לברר עמדתנו ויחסנו אל המציאות הזו שהעמידו בפנינו. Our only question as pious Jews is, what is our stance? What is our relationship with this reality that these Jews have confronted us with? And he's very honest. He says there's no precedent. We see nowhere in the Torah or the Talmud or the halachis musag kazeh v'dinim ka'ele. There's no halacha for how you're supposed to relate to a Jewish state. Matai le'akir or lo le'akir b'medina. There's no halacha about recognition of such a state or not recognition of such a state. He's replying here, by the way, to the Satmars. The Satmars say it's forbidden to recognize such a state. And he's saying, what are you talking about? Right? There's no precedent for this. You can't say it's forbidden because there was no one to ever forbid it before. He says, what is the recognition of a country? Like Morocco recognizes Israel now. What does that mean? He says it's just propaganda that countries do with each other. It doesn't have any halachic status. There's no halachic status to recognize that a country exists or not to recognize that a country exists. There's no mitzvah There's no prohibition. The state of Israel exists, and we live here. And our job is to figure out, what the Torah wants us to do and how the Torah wants us to live within this country, which is a fait accompli. Say there. Okay. So we've seen in their own words, we've heard them, the various reactions to Zionism as Messianism, or I should say Zionism as Messianism or anti-Messianism. Is it a rebellion against God to prevent the Messiah? Is it keeping the Messiah? Or is it the Messiah? Or is it neither? And you just have to figure out how to best make do. Maybe you'll see it negatively like these people. Maybe you'll see it positively like many religious Zionists always have. Regarding classic religious Zionism, before Kiddush Emunim, I should mention also the other side of it, or maybe the negative side of it, and that is this. Rav Reines represented an ideology that arguably was the mainstream ideology of religious Zionism until the Yom Kippur War. And that ideology said that the state of Israel is not demonic. The state of Israel is not messianic. The state of Israel is not the kind of blah thing that we just have to make the best of. The state of Israel is wonderful. The state of Israel is good from a Torah perspective. The state of Israel is a blessing by God, even if it's not a messianic redemption. And that view was the mainstream view from Rav Reines probably until the Yom Kippur War and the establishment of Gush Emunim. But it's important to point out the flip side of that view. Okay, the flip side of that view came out in the Uganda plan. Okay, when Herzl brought the Uganda plan to a Zionist Congress, he said, look, we're looking for a practical way for Jews to gain independence, and that will be something which will be a positive step forward for the Jewish people. The question is where we can do it. All right, the Sultan's not going to let us do it in the ancient land of Israel. So where can we set up the Jewish state? And there was the Uganda plan. There was perhaps, maybe, a possibility to set up a Jewish state in what is now Uganda. This caused fierce reaction. And the wild part of the fierce reaction, which may seem paradoxical, is that it was mostly the secular Zionists who opposed the Uganda plan. They said if we're creating a Jewish state, it has to be in our land. The French built a modern France in France, not in Siberia. Okay, and the Jews have to build a modern Jewish state in their land. And we won't be able to bring Jews to Uganda. The call of Uganda doesn't resonate with Russian Jews like the call of the land of Israel. It was the secular Zionists, by and large, who opposed the Uganda plan. The Mizrahi party, led by Rav Reines, supported the Uganda plan. And that's a clear upshot of the ideology. If the ideology is that a Jewish state is a good thing, and the Jewish state can help millions of Jews, and a Jewish state would be a blessing by God if he grants it, then you'll take the blessing wherever God grants it. And you'll make do with whatever place he gives you. For the ultimate redemption, it has to be Jerusalem. But for a way to help Jews, it doesn't have to be Jerusalem. And that's why the religious Zionist party supported the Uganda plan. Okay, Rav Kook, on the other hand, had a fit with the Uganda plan. Okay, he thought that it was the worst thing in the world. Okay, and that already shows you the tension. Okay, Rav Kook and his descendants and his followers, they always had a certain amount of disappointment with mainstream religious Zionism, And that disappointment came out in force when the Uganda plan came up. So we'll stop here unless people have other comments. Okay. If not, I'll just end with this. Oh, yes, go ahead. I thought someone spoke. If not, then I'll just end with this point. We met the Lubavitcher Rebbe tonight, and we saw his view on the state of Israel. It's a good thing because it helps Jews. But it's a bad thing because Jews think that they've been redeemed when they really haven't. Okay, the state of Israel is not redemption. It is not a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. What he wants Jews to do is look for the real redemption. And the real redemption that Lubavitcher Rebbe is looking for is the topic of our meeting next week.
Avi,
Okay?
quick,
Anything
Avi,
else? Yeah.
quick question. How do you spell Rav Reinus's name?
Reines.
Thank you. Hard to look things up when you don't know how to spell.
You're welcome. Okay.
I think I might have one question.
Yeah.
This is Lisa.
Sure.
It's really knowing your opinion. It's not like going to be it's opinionated response about, and you can simplify it just to help me, but it's going to be a hard question. But after like coming to this point in our learning, which I knew, but obviously now I know the inside much deeper. I just feel like I understand from the maybe first temple period time or second temple, first Beit HaMikdash, second Beit HaMikdash, but I just feel to myself like, what does Jewish unity even look like? I think that's what I'm like. I just wanted to hear anything of what does Jewish unity look like? That was my thing I'm saying to you. Can you hear that?
You're asking what Jewish unity looks like?
Yes, I am, because
that's the question.
I think, yeah. I mean, meaning it's something to hear your opinion, or from all that you've studied as a person, as a caring Jew, a person living here, like what could ameliorate or like calm the heart with the journey, because it's again, that's why I'm referencing historically what I know, which is maybe the first and second temple periods for short period. Whatever you want to call it, Achdut Yisrael, Jewish unity, political Jewish unity. I don't know how you want to frame it, but that's just one thing I wanted to hear. If you could just share a couple lines on that, or what your thought or vision is of that.
I don't think it ever existed.
I can only give a personal response to a question like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking for. Yeah.
Okay. I guess two things. The first is that Jewish unity can only be a conversation, even an argument. Okay? The Jews are a family. And you can have disagreements in a family, you can have opposing opinions within a family, but it doesn't mean that the family is not united. There's a great book that I would recommend, maybe another book, Arguments for the Sake of Heaven by Jonathan Sachs, who tries to show how Jews, despite their diverse opinions, can have an argument for the sake of heaven, can be one people, can have a kind of unity that doesn't have to be a commonality or a sense of being identical. That's the first point. The second point is that I can only think of one historical period where, for the most part, the argument was that kind of argument. You know, Jews always disagreed, even during the period that I'm going to mention. But in this period, the argument was an argument within a family. You had all kinds of opinions, and yet the argument, for the most part, always remained, not always, but for the most part, remained within the family. And that period was the period of what we call the Jewish Middle Ages. For the purposes of your question, we can take it all the way from the year 70 maybe from after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, all the way until the French Revolution. Okay, a period of about 1700 years. And during that period, there were certain schisms and there were certain big arguments. But compared to the stuff we see today, it was nothing. Okay, Jews shared one common tradition, and that common tradition was the dual Torah, the written Torah and the oral Torah. That's what Jews around the world shared in a traditional era, okay, for about 1700 years. And Jews during those 1700 years, they did feel themselves to be one people, okay? French Jews didn't think of themselves as French, and German Jews didn't think of themselves as Germans. Ottoman Jews didn't think of themselves as Ottomans. They all felt themselves to be Jews. And when they visited each other, they were visiting people from the same family. When they communicated with each other, they would do it in Hebrew if they didn't have another common tongue. And the sense of this shared tradition is something that continued for a very long time. There were exceptions to the rule, right? There was Karaism, and there was the Maimonidean controversy. But to have two big controversies in a period of 1700 years is not bad for a family.
I can't help thinking of the old saw when you had two Jews who had three opinions.
Yeah.
It's just that what I just wanted to it's again, they're not answers, but they're observations of that, like the Torah sets up such a large, our whole peoplehood is based on this expectation of our unity. I don't know if you would agree or not agree, but not, I agree with what you're saying in terms of within a family, different perspectives. So I don't know, I just am feeling confused how the work is to arrive at that, I think, more than I used to think now. Yeah, after tonight especially.
I think the reason you're confused is the same reason that most modern Jews are confused. We live at the most acrimonious point ever in Jewish history. Never have Jews been this acrimonious.
Why would it
Not
be?
even
Why?
during Second Temple times.
Why? But why would that be when in a way we have, in a way, the most contemporary, easiest time? That's what I'm not understanding. Yeah, why is that? What does that mean?
No. When I say our time, I don't mean 2020. I mean modern times. Okay?
Right.
And the reason for it is simple in one word: modernity. The Jewish family has never faced a challenge like modernity before there was modernity. And that challenge is the root of the vast controversies between Jews that we find in modern times.
And to simplify, because I have studied a little, I don't know the topic of how you mean modernity, but you just mean that in terms of almost like a perspective, or anything could be acceptable, or anything is right of way. Is that sort of how you mean when you say modernity, that anyone and everyone's perspective is something that's on the table?
Lisa, I think we're going a little bit off topic here.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm just trying to really leave it on a note.
Yeah, we should focus on the topic at hand. That's a whole different issue.
Oh, well, to me, it's the same issue, because it's about the understanding of where we're holding in this journey of Jewish statehood, Jewish unity, the Jewish people of all the different sects. Okay, thank you.
I think Lisa is simply reacting to the vicious controversy about Zionism.
I mean, being that I just made
so utterly antagonistic to one another.
Right. I mean, the only thing I'm trying to respond to is that I've just made Aliyah. Obviously, many of you have always lived here or have lived here recently. And I just am trying to understand the Torah's expectation, whether it be modernity, I don't know how many hundreds of years ago or now, upon us. the expectation, I don't understand, of the reality, God, the Torah, the mandate upon us, and then in the state and with each other. I mean, I know there's no easy answer, but I think that's very important to think about, to do this work, or to like hear these Torahs I've learned from you. That's on my mind. That's what I could share anyway. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
One thing at a time.
Thanks, Lisa. Very good. So everyone have a great week.
You too, Abby.
Anyone been vaccinated yet?
Not yet.
Was
in that point.
Yep, I had, Richard was.
I had mine last night.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. And I said,
Kind of,
Mazel tov.
going around, you know that bracha? I can't remember the rabbi, but I got someone to record me saying it.
yes, I saw it. I saw it. There are a couple of brachot going around for getting a vaccination.
Afternoon.
Mazel tov.
Mazal tov.
Mazel
Thank
tov.
well, having this
Okay.
center in Karmiel is a great help.
Yeah.
Yeah.